The millionaire CEO was never meant to meet her until a clinic's devastating error made her the mother of his child. Enjoy the story. And before we begin, drop a comment below and tell us where you were watching from. Damian Sterling did not believe in accidents. He believed in leverage, hostile takeovers, and the unassailable power of a 10-figure bank account. His world was a sterile ecosystem of glass towers, whispered stock tips, and contracts that could cripple nations. Accidents were for the unprepared, the weak. From his throne-like chair on the 50th floor of Sterling Tower, he surveyed the sprawling city below not as a home, but as a chessboard he had already won. The phone to his ear was cold, just like his voice. "Liquidate their assets," he said, his tone flat and final. "No, I don't care about their fourth quarter projections. I care about the ink drying on the acquisition papers by 5 o'clock. Make it happen." He ended the call without a goodbye, the silence in his office more profound than any noise. His life was a series of such transactions, clean, efficient, and utterly devoid of human messiness. He was powerful, respected, feared, and profoundly, achingly alone. He had built an empire of steel and glass but lived in a fortress of ice. That was why the sputtering cough of his custom-built Bentley was such a personal affront. The car, a machine engineered for perfection, slowed to a graceless halt on a street far from the polished avenues he usually traveled. Potholes scarred the asphalt, and the buildings wore coats of graffiti like weary battle armor. His driver, a man paid to ensure such inconveniences never occurred, was pale with apology. A flat tire. A common, vulgar problem that had now intruded upon Damian's meticulously controlled reality. He stepped out of the car, his $1,000 suit a stark declaration of otherness in the humble neighborhood. Irritation prickled at his skin. He had a gala to prepare for, a speech to approve, a world to command. He did not have time for this. As his driver fumbled with the jack, a small voice cut through the city haze. "Mister, you need a hand with that." Damian turned. A young boy, no older than 5, stood there with a solemn expression. He was small for his age, dressed in clean but faded jeans and a t-shirt with a cartoon rocket on it. Damian's first instinct was to dismiss him, a curt wave of his hand to send the child scurrying back to whatever tenement he had emerged from. But then the boy looked up and Damian's entire world tilted on its axis. The boy's eyes. They were a shade of sapphire so deep and brilliant it was almost unnatural. A specific, unforgettable hue that Damian had not seen in 5 years. Not since he had closed the lid of his wife's casket. They were Clara's eyes. His eyes. The Sterling eyes, a genetic marker as defined and unyielding as their family name. Tom seemed to stop. The city noise faded into a dull roar. Damian could not breathe, could not think. It was impossible. A coincidence. But the certainty of it was a physical blow, a punch to the gut that left him winded. The resemblance was not just in the color, but in the shape, the intensity of the gaze. It was like looking at a ghost. Or a mirror. A woman's voice, breathless and concerned, broke the spell. "Leo, don't bother the man." "I am so sorry, sir." A woman, Amelia, rushed to the boy's side, her hand gently taking his shoulder. She was plainly dressed, her face etched with a tiredness that spoke of long hours and little rest, but her expression was kind. Damian tried to form words, but his throat was tight. He could only stare at the boy, Leo, whose name echoed in the sudden void of his mind. Leo. He felt a phantom pain in his chest, a memory of a name he and Clara had chosen, whispered in a sterile hospital room filled with false hope. Then, Leo did something that shattered the last vestiges of Damian's composure. He pointed a small finger toward a newsstand on the corner. On the cover of a business magazine, Damian's own face stared back, severe and commanding. "Mom," the boy said, his voice filled with the simple, irrefutable logic of a child. "Look. He has my eyes." Amelia's gaze flickered from the magazine cover to Damian's face, her brow furrowing in confusion. But Damian was no longer there. He was adrift in a sea of impossibility. "My eyes." The words were a verdict. A revelation. He stumbled back a step, his hand finding the cold metal of the Bentley for support. His driver announced the tire was fixed. The words barely registered. Damian ignored the open car door, ignored the concerned look from his employee. He turned and walked away, hailing the first passing taxi with a numb, automatic gesture. He left his car, his driver, and his perfectly controlled world sitting on that broken street. Inside the cab, his phone buzzed incessantly. It was his sister, Evelyn, no doubt calling about the Sterling Foundation Gala. The most important social event of the year. An event that now seemed utterly, laughably insignificant. He stared out the window, but he did not see the city blurring past. He saw only a pair of sapphire blue eyes that had just resurrected a past he thought was buried forever. Back in the sterile silence of his penthouse, the city lights twinkling like a distant, indifferent galaxy, Damien felt like a trespasser in his own life. He bypassed the floor-to-ceiling windows and the art collection worth more than a small country's GDP. He went straight to his private study and knelt before a safe hidden behind a mahogany panel. Inside, beneath velvet lining, was a single, small wooden box. He opened it. The scent of Clara's perfume, faint and ghostly, rose to meet him. It held the meager artifacts of their shared dream. A photograph of them on their wedding day, her sapphire eyes radiant with a joy that now felt like a cruel joke. A list of baby names they had scribbled on a napkin with Leo circled in her elegant handwriting. And at the bottom, a single, clinical document from the fertility center. It detailed their last hope, one viable embryo, a perfect fusion of their DNA. He remembered the call from the clinic director like it was yesterday. The somber, professional voice on the other end of the line explaining the procedure had failed. There was no pregnancy. The embryo was lost. A few months later, he lost Clara to the illness she had fought so hard to beat, the dream of a child dying with her. He had buried his grief under a mountain of work, encasing his heart in the same ice that now seemed to be cracking. He traced the photograph of Clara's face, his thumb brushing over her eyes. The boy on the street. It couldn't be. And yet it was. The absolute certainty of it defied all logic. He had been told there was nothing left. He had been lied to. A chime at the door broke his reverie. He closed the box, his movements stiff, and went to the door. It was his sister, Evelyn, sweeping in like a perfectly coiffed storm. She was the epitome of sterling polish, impeccable designer dress, flawless makeup, and a smile that never quite reached her eyes. She was the architect of his social life, the fierce guardian of the family's public image. "Damien, finally," she said, her voice a smooth, chiding melody. "You are not even dressed. The gala starts in 2 hours. I have Angelica Croft meeting us there. Her father is on the board at Petrocorp. It would be an invaluable alliance." Damien stared at her, the words washing over him without meaning. An alliance. A merger. That was all life was to her. He felt a wave of nausea. "I'm not going, Evie." Evelyn's smile tightened. "Don't be ridiculous. You are the face of the foundation. What is wrong with you? You've been like a ghost all afternoon." She glanced around the stark, empty penthouse. "It's been 5 years, Damien. Clara is gone. You need to move on. You need to secure the sterling legacy. Our legacy." Her words, meant to be pragmatic, struck him as monstrously hollow. Legacy. She spoke of legacy as if it were a stock portfolio to be managed. He had just seen his true legacy on a cracked sidewalk, and he didn't even know his name. He turned away from her. "Please leave." Evelyn let out an exasperated sigh, a flash of genuine anger in her eyes before it was masked again by cool composure. "Fine. Wallow if you must. But you are damaging the family name with this behavior." She swept out as quickly as she had arrived, leaving a trail of expensive perfume in her wake. As soon as the door closed, Damien picked up his phone. He did not call his broker or his lawyers. He called Marcus Thorne, his head of security. Marcus was a quiet, unassuming man who had spent 20 years in military intelligence before coming to work for Damien. He was a man who found things that did not want to be found. "Marcus," Damien said, his voice low and urgent. "I have a task for you. It's off the books. Absolute discretion is paramount." He described the boy, the mother, the street where his car had broken down. "Her name is Amelia Vance. The boy is Leo. I want to know everything. Where they live, where she works, their entire history. And Marcus, I want you to dig into the old Northgate fertility clinic. The one my wife and I used 5 years ago. I was told there was a fire, that the records were destroyed. Find them anyway." Marcus, true to form, simply said, "Consider it done." The hours that followed were the longest of Damien's life. He paced the length of his penthouse, the city lights mocking him with their cold brilliance. He was a man who commanded information, who could get the schematics for a rival's prototype or the private cell number of a head of state in minutes. But this information felt different. It was personal. It was terrifying. His phone finally rang. It was Marcus. "I have something," Marcus said, his voice grim. "It's not what you were going to expect." Damien held his breath. "Amelia Vance was a patient at Northgate," Marcus began. "Same time as you and your wife. Single, using an anonymous sperm donor. She was part of their low-income support program. After her procedure, there was an incident. The clinic claimed a clerical error. A few months later, there was indeed a fire. Very convenient. It wiped out most of the paper records. But you found something, Damien pressed, his knuckles white as he gripped the phone. I did, Marcus confirmed. Amelia Vance was one of several patients who received a significant financial settlement from the clinic for procedural errors and emotional distress. It came with a strict non-disclosure agreement. She was paid to be silent. Damien's mind raced. So there was an error. A terrible, life-altering mistake. But that wasn't the twist Marcus had warned him about. Here's the part you need to hear, Damien, Marcus said, his voice dropping. The payment wasn't from the clinic's insurance. It was routed through a third-party shell corporation. An untraceable account designed to anonymize the source. What shell corporation? Damien demanded. There was a pause, heavy with significance. It's called Argent Solutions, Marcus said softly. I ran the registration. It's a subsidiary holding. It's owned, free and clear, by Sterling Industries. The phone nearly slipped from Damien's hand. His own company. His family's company had paid hush money to the woman who was raising his son. This was not an accident. This was a cover-up. And the tendrils of it led directly back to his own front door. He felt a cold dread creep into his soul. Someone in his world, someone close to him, had known the truth for 5 years and had buried it. The revelation that his own company had financed the silence surrounding his son's existence changed everything. It transformed his shock into a cold, burning resolve. He was no longer just a man reeling from a personal crisis. He was an investigator with an enemy, and that was a role he understood perfectly. The first step was to get close, to see the truth for himself, not through Marcus's reports, but with his own eyes. Marcus's file on Amelia Vance was painfully thin. She worked 2 jobs, a day shift as a librarian's assistant and 3 nights a week as a waitress. Her one volunteer activity was at a community kitchen in a church basement not far from her apartment. It was the perfect entry point, a place where a man in a bespoke suit would be an alien, but a man in jeans looking to help might blend in. He bought the clothes on the way. They felt foreign on his skin, cheap and rough. He left his watch, a timepiece worth more than the car he drove in the glove compartment. He walked into the humid, noisy kitchen under the name Dan, a man new to the city looking to give back. The woman in charge, a stout, no-nonsense lady named Martha, handed him an apron and pointed him toward a mountain of potatoes that needed peeling. For the first hour, he was a disaster. He, a man who could orchestrate a multi-billion-dollar merger, could barely handle a potato peeler. He was clumsy, slow, his hands accustomed to keyboards and pens, not calloused kitchen tools. He felt a dozen pairs of eyes on him, the other volunteers sizing up the newcomer who was clearly out of his element. He felt a flush of humility so profound it was dizzying. Then she arrived. Amelia came in through a back door, a tired but determined set to her jaw. She gave Martha a warm greeting before tying on her own apron. She did not notice him at first. She moved with an easy, practiced grace, navigating the chaotic kitchen, her voice calm and kind as she spoke to the men and women lining up for a hot meal. He watched her, his heart a frantic drum against his ribs. This was the woman raising his son. He spent the next 2 weeks in that kitchen. Each shift was a lesson in a world he never knew existed. He saw the faces of real struggle, not the abstract poverty discussed in his foundation's boardrooms, but the raw, immediate need of people who relied on this one meal to get through the day. He saw Amelia moving among them, not with pity, but with a deep, abiding respect. She remembered their names, asked about their children, slipped an extra bread roll to a woman with trembling hands. His guilt was a physical weight. He lived in a penthouse that could house every person in this room. He threw away more food at a single corporate dinner than was served here in a week. And while he was building his empire of excess, his son was living in a world where a shared sandwich was a reality. He had seen it himself one afternoon, following them from a distance. He watched as Amelia bought a single, small cupcake from a bakery, presenting it to Leo in the park. They shared it, bite for bite, a tiny, poignant celebration. He learned from Marcus it had been the boy's 5th birthday. The knowledge was a knife in his gut. He started to find ways to help, subtly at first. He noticed the kitchen's refrigerator was failing. The next day, a brand new, top-of-the-line industrial unit was delivered, an anonymous donation he arranged with a single phone call. He saw Amelia's worn-out waitress shoes and had a gift certificate for the best shoe store in the city anonymously mailed to her apartment. He was playing God, using his wealth like a phantom benefactor, and he hated himself for it. It was a coward's way of parenting. The real test came with Leo. The boy often came to the kitchen after school, sitting quietly in a corner doing his homework. Damien started to bring him puzzles, complex logic games he knew a bright child would enjoy. Leo was more than bright, he was brilliant. He saw patterns and solutions with a quickness that startled Damien. It was the same analytical mind that had made the Sterling family a dynasty. One evening, Damien was helping him assemble a complex model car, a miniature replica of a classic Aston Martin. Their heads were bent close together over the tiny, intricate parts. For the first time in 5 years, Damien felt a flicker of genuine, uncomplicated happiness. The smell of cheap soap and boiled cabbage in the kitchen faded away. There was only the quiet focus, the boy's small, deft fingers guiding a piece into place, the shared satisfaction of creation. "You're good at this, Dan," Leo said, his voice serious. "You are too," Damien replied, his own voice huskier than he expected. Leo paused, holding a tiny silver wheel in his hand. He looked up, his sapphire eyes locking onto Damien's. The playful mood vanished, replaced by a child's unnerving perception. "You look sad," he said. "Even when you smile." Damien's breath caught. "Like that man in the magazine," Leo continued, his memory sharp and clear. "The one with my eyes. He looked sad too. Are you looking for someone you lost?" The question was so direct, so innocent, yet it pierced through every layer of Damien's careful deception. He had no answer. He was looking for someone he had never known he had. He was looking for himself, a version of him he had buried with Clara. Just then, Amelia walked over, a dishcloth in her hand. She had been watching them from across the room, and she had seen the shift in mood. Her gaze fell on Damien, and for the first time he saw not just politeness in her eyes, but a flicker of deep, primal suspicion. She had sensed a connection that went beyond a friendly volunteer and her son. "Leo, honey, it's time to pack up your things," she said, her tone gentle but firm. Her eyes, however, stayed on Damien. "Thank you for helping him, Dan. You've been very kind." The polite dismissal was clear. The wall was back up. He had gotten too close, and her maternal instincts, honed by years of protecting her son alone, had sounded an alarm. As he watched them leave, the small model car sitting half-finished on the table, Damien knew his time of hiding in the shadows was over. He had to tell her the truth, no matter the consequences. But before he could, his own carefully constructed world was about to be attacked by an enemy he had never suspected. Evelyn Sterling did not appreciate anomalies. Her brother's sudden interest in volunteer work, his disheveled appearance, and his repeated absences from key meetings were more than anomalous, they were alarming. She was the curator of the Sterling image, and Damien's erratic behavior was a smudge on a masterpiece. So she did what she always did when faced with a problem: she hired someone to make it disappear. Or, in this case, to find out what it was. The private investigator's report landed on her polished mahogany desk like a small bomb. It contained grainy photographs of Damien dressed in common clothes laughing with a small boy in a church basement. It included a dossier on one Amelia Vance, a woman with no family, no money, and no social standing. A nobody. But the most damning piece of evidence was a photograph of the boy, Leo. His face was turned to the camera, and his eyes, those unmistakable sterling sapphire eyes, stared out from the page. Evelyn felt a cold fury unlike anything she had ever known. It was Clara. It was that woman's ghost reaching out from the grave to taint the family line with this complication. For 5 years, she thought she had solved the problem. She had tidied it away, burying the secret of the switched embryo under a mountain of legal documents and an untraceable payment. She had done it to protect Damien, to free him from the past so he could secure their future with a suitable wife, a proper heir. And now he had found it. Her first move was precise and cruel. She picked up a burner phone and made an anonymous call to the city's Child Protective Services division. Her voice was a mask of fabricated concern as she described an unstable, unknown man who had suddenly appeared in the life of a young, single mother and her vulnerable son. She painted a picture of potential danger, of neglect, using all the right keywords to trigger an immediate investigation. It was a warning shot, designed to scare Amelia away from Damien and remind her of how precarious her world truly was. While Evelyn was setting her plan in motion, Damien's own investigation was bearing fruit. Marcus had tracked down a former nurse from the Northgate Clinic, a woman named Carol who had quit shortly after the fire, haunted by what she knew. Marcus met her in a quiet diner, and for the price of a guaranteed protection and a new start somewhere else, she told him everything. There were 2 embryos that day, she whispered, her hands trembling around her coffee cup. Mr. and Mrs. Sterling's, and one from an anonymous donor for a charity case, a woman named Vance. They were both perfect. Top grade. She paused, swallowing hard. The protocol was ironclad. Double and triple checks. A switch like that, it can't happen by accident. Someone had to override the system manually. Someone with authority. Marcus pressed gently. Who had that authority? Only the clinic director, Dr. Alistair Finch, Carol said. But he wouldn't do something like that on his own. He was a weak man. Easily influenced, she then revealed the final, devastating piece of the puzzle. The day before the implantation, Dr. Finch had a private meeting. A woman came to see him. Very elegant, very powerful. I saw her leaving his office. She was a Sterling. Not Mrs. Sterling. The other one. The sister. The call from Marcus felt like a physical impact. Evelyn. His own sister. The betrayal was so profound, so monstrous, it almost defied comprehension. The hush money from the Sterling-owned Shell Corporation, her constant pressure for him to move on and create a proper legacy, it all snapped into horrifying focus. She had not just buried a secret, she had orchestrated the entire tragedy. He was about to drive to Amelia's apartment to tell her everything when his phone rang again. It was a frantic, terrified Amelia. Dan, you have to come. There are people here. From the government. They're asking questions about you, about Leo. They're threatening to take him away. He broke every speed limit getting there. He burst into the tiny apartment to find two stern-faced CPS workers and a terrified Amelia clutching a crying Leo. The lead worker turned to him. And who are you, sir? This was it. The end of the lies. My name is Damien Sterling, he said, his voice ringing with an authority he hadn't used in weeks. And this is my son. The room went silent. The CPS workers exchanged a look of disbelief. Amelia stared at him, her face a canvas of shock, betrayal, and dawning horror. He ignored them all, pulling out his phone and calling his personal lawyer, a man whose hourly rate could buy the entire apartment building. Shut this down, Damien ordered. Now. Within minutes, the baseless, anonymous claim was exposed for the harassment it was, and the chastened CPS workers retreated. But the damage was done. The apartment was filled with a new, terrible tension. You lied to me, Amelia whispered, her voice trembling with rage and hurt as she held her weeping son. You've been playing some kind of sick game. No, he said, his heart aching at the look on her face. I was trying to find the truth. A truth that was stolen from both of us. He took a deep breath and laid it all out, the embryo, the clinic, the impossible coincidence of their son's eyes. And then he told her the worst part. It wasn't an error, Amelia. It was deliberate. It was my sister. She did this. He showed her the evidence Marcus had compiled, the bank transfers, the nurse's statement, the proof of Evelyn's involvement. As Amelia read through it, her anger slowly morphed into a stunned, horrified understanding. They were not adversaries. They were victims of the same cruel manipulation. They were, in this terrible moment, allies. Their fragile new alliance was tested almost immediately. Evelyn, enraged that her CPS ploy had not only failed, but had seemingly pushed Damien and Amelia closer, escalated her tactics. She confronted Damien at his office, her composure finally cracking. I know what you are doing, she hissed, her voice low and venomous. You are going to let that woman and her street urchin child drag the Sterling name through the mud. Have you lost your mind? The only person dragging our name through the mud is you, Evelyn, he said, his voice dangerously calm. You need to decide what's more important, Damien, she shot back, her eyes blazing with a fanatic's conviction. The legacy our father built, our entire future, or this sentimental garbage from the past. End it, or I will. The threat hung in the air, cold and sharp. That night, Amelia called him, her voice choked with panic. Her apartment had been broken into. Nothing of value was taken, not the cheap television or the little money she kept in a jar. But on the floor of Leo's small bedroom, the model Aston Martin they had built together was smashed into 100 pieces. It was not a robbery. It was a message delivered with surgical cruelty aimed directly at a 5-year-old boy. The war had begun. The sight of the smashed model car ignited a fire in Damien that had long been dormant. The cold, calculating businessman merged with the raw fury of a protective father. Evelyn had crossed a line from which there was no return. She had threatened his son. He would not just defeat her, he would dismantle her, piece by piece, using the very power and resources she worshipped. He put Marcus Thorne on a singular mission, watch Evelyn's every move. He wanted to know who she met, who she called, where she funneled her money. I want irrefutable proof, Marcus, Damien ordered. Something she cannot lie her way out of. I want to own her. While Marcus worked in the shadows, Damien took care of his family. He moved Amelia and Leo out of their small apartment and into a secure residential suite at a 5-star hotel under a different name. The suite was bigger than their entire apartment building floor, with panoramic views and round-the-clock security. Leo was wide-eyed, fascinated by the room service menu, but Amelia was tense and uncomfortable, surrounded by a level of luxury that felt like a gilded cage. "We can't stay here," she said, pacing the plush carpet. "This isn't our world, Damien." "Right now, safety is our world," he countered gently. "Let me keep you safe. Please." It took less than 48 hours for Marcus to deliver. Evelyn, growing paranoid, made a mistake. She arranged a clandestine meeting with Dr. Alistair Finch, the disgraced former director of the Northgate Clinic, in a private room at an old, exclusive club. She was tying up loose ends. Marcus, equipped with the latest surveillance technology, captured it all. Crystal-clear audio and video of Evelyn handing Dr. Finch a briefcase full of cash in exchange for his permanent silence and a signed affidavit blaming a long-dead subordinate for the embryo mix-up. The recording was damning. It was the final nail in her coffin. Damien didn't hesitate. He had the video file loaded onto a tablet and drove directly to the one place that represented the heart of his family's power, the main boardroom at Sterling Tower. He found Evelyn there, presiding over a preliminary budget meeting, looking every bit the powerful, untouchable executive. He walked in, and the room fell silent at the sight of his thunderous expression. "Everyone out," he commanded. The executive scurried out of the room, sensing the impending storm. Evelyn remained seated, a flicker of defiance in her eyes. "What is the meaning of this, Damien? You can't just—" He cut her off by placing the tablet on the polished table in front of her and pressing play. She watched, her face draining of all color, as her own voice filled the silent room, coolly negotiating the price of a man's silence, callously dismissing the lives she had ruined. When the video ended, she stared at the screen, speechless. The mask was gone. All that was left was the raw, ugly truth of her ambition. "Why?" Damien asked, his voice quiet but heavy with the weight of her betrayal. "Why would you do this to me? To an innocent child?" Cornered and exposed, Evelyn finally broke. The polished facade crumbled, revealing the bitter, resentful woman beneath. "I did it for you," she shrieked, her voice shrill and ugly. "I did it for this family. Clara made you weak. She was a sentimental distraction. After she died, that embryo was her ghost, holding you back. I wanted you to be free. To marry Angelica Croft, to merge our companies, to have a real heir who would strengthen our legacy, not some biological accident." She looked at him, her eyes wild with a twisted sense of justification. "I gave it to a nobody, a single woman with nothing, so it would just disappear. It was a problem and I solved it. I did it to protect you. To protect everything our father built." There was no remorse in her voice. Only the terrifying conviction that her actions were not just justified, but necessary. Damien felt a profound, soul-deep revulsion. He saw her not as his sister, but as a monster wearing her face. "You are no longer my sister," he said, the words falling like stones in the silence. He picked up the boardroom phone and dialed his head of security. "Send them in." 2 uniformed security guards entered the room. Evelyn stared at them in disbelief. "What are you doing?" "I am calling an emergency board meeting to have you removed from your position, effective immediately," he said, his voice like ice. "I have already instructed the bank to freeze your access to all family trusts and company accounts. And this recording is being sent to the district attorney. You will face criminal charges for this, Evelyn. For conspiracy, for fraud, for what you did to my son." Her world, built on a foundation of power and money, was crumbling around her in real time. Her face contorted in a mask of pure hatred. "You will regret this," she snarled as security escorted her from the room. "You chose them over your own family." "They are my family," he said to the empty room. His next stop was the hotel. He found Amelia sitting by the window, watching over a sleeping Leo. The anxiety was still etched on her face. He sat down opposite her, his own exhaustion palpable. He didn't try to soften the blow. He told her everything, the confrontation, Evelyn's sickening justification, the steps he had taken to remove her from their lives. He laid his soul bare, confessing his own years of cold ambition, of prioritizing the Sterling legacy over everything else. "She was right about one thing," he admitted, his voice thick with shame. "I was lost. I let the company become my entire identity. But I am not that man anymore. Leo, meeting you, it woke me up." He looked at her, his eyes pleading for a shred of understanding, of forgiveness. "I know I can't fix the past. I can't give you back the 5 years she stole. But I swear to you, I will spend the rest of my life trying to make it right. For you. For him." He reached across the space between them, his hand hovering, not daring to touch her. I want to be his father, Amelia. His real father in every way that matters. If you'll let me. Amelia looked from his earnest, broken face to the sleeping form of her son. The son she had loved and protected with every fiber of her being. The son who had his father's eyes. Tears welled in her own eyes, but they were not tears of fear or anger. They were tears of a long, painful release. She reached out and finally, for the first time, took his hand. The battle against Evelyn was over. The battle for their future was just beginning. Evelyn Sterling was a creature of immense pride and dwindling options. Stripped of her board seat and cut off from the family fortune, she was cornered. But a cornered viper is at its most dangerous. She had one card left to play, the court of public opinion. With the last of her personal funds, she pulled strings to move the annual Sterling Foundation Charity Gala forward. It was the crown jewel of the city's social calendar, an event she had always orchestrated. She would use its stage one last time to craft her own narrative, to paint Damien as an unstable man being manipulated by a gold-digging opportunist, and to salvage her own reputation before it was irrevocably destroyed. She leaked tantalizing hints to the press, promising a shocking announcement. The media, smelling blood in the water, circled hungrily. Damien knew what she was planning. Marcus's intelligence was clear. His lawyers advised him to issue a press release to get ahead of the story. But Damien refused. This was not a corporate battle to be won with press releases. This was a family wound that needed to be cauterized in the open. He would not hide. He would not let Evelyn control the narrative for one more second. He would face her on her own chosen battlefield. The night of the gala arrived. The ballroom of the city's most opulent hotel was a glittering sea of wealth and power. Damien arrived not with a society date on his arm, but with Amelia and Leo by his side. Amelia was beautiful and terrified in a simple, elegant navy dress he had insisted on buying for her. Leo, in a tiny tuxedo, clung to her hand, his eyes wide at the spectacle. They were met with a barrage of whispering and stares. They were the mystery, the scandal everyone was buzzing about. Damien ignored them all, his gaze fixed on the stage. Evelyn took her place at the podium, a vision of defiant elegance in a blood-red gown. She began her speech, her voice smooth and practiced, speaking of family, of legacy, of the sacred duty to protect what one has built. She was laying the groundwork, painting herself as the righteous protector. In these trying times, she said, her voice laced with false sorrow, families can be tested. Bonds can be threatened by outside influences, by those who seek to exploit a good name for their own gain. That was his cue. Before she could say Amelia's name, Damien was moving. He walked calmly up the side steps and onto the stage. He did not rush. He simply walked over to his sister and gently took the microphone from her stunned grasp. A collective gasp rippled through the audience. My sister speaks of legacy, Damien said, his voice calm and clear, amplified throughout the cavernous ballroom. She speaks of protecting the Sterling name. For years, I thought that meant protecting our stock prices, our market share, our public image. He paused, his eyes sweeping the room before landing back on Evelyn, whose face was a mask of fury. I was wrong. For 5 years, a lie has been allowed to fester at the heart of my family. A lie my sister created. He held up his phone and connected it to the ballroom's audiovisual system. Evelyn's voice, cold and cruel, filled the room. The entire recording of her confession, of her bribing Dr. Finch, echoed off the crystal chandeliers. The silence in the audience was absolute, broken only by Evelyn's frantic, "Stop it. Turn it off." When the recording finished, the silence was even more profound. Damien wasn't done. "I have one more person who would like to speak." At his signal, Marcus Thorne entered from the side of the stage, gently guiding the former clinic nurse, Carol, to the microphone. Trembling but resolute, Carol told her story. The story of the 2 embryos, of the impossible accident, of the powerful Sterling sister who had visited the clinic the day before. Her tearful, first-hand account was more powerful than any recording. It was the human cost of Evelyn's ambition, laid bare for all to see. As Carol finished her testimony, the main doors of the ballroom opened. 2 uniformed police detectives walked calmly and deliberately through the stunned, parted crowd. They did not hesitate. They walked directly onto the stage, the camera flashes from the press section erupting like a firestorm. They stopped in front of a pale, defeated Evelyn Sterling. "Evelyn Sterling," the lead detective said. his voice devoid of emotion. "You are under arrest for conspiracy to commit fraud and multiple violations of federal medical privacy laws." Her downfall was not a quiet removal from a boardroom. It was a public spectacle, a complete and utter humiliation broadcast live to the world. Damien turned away from the scene of his sister's disgrace and faced the audience one last time. His gaze found Amelia and Leo, who were standing near the entrance, watching him with a mixture of awe and relief. "For years I pursued the wrong legacy," he said into the microphone, his voice resonating with a newfound strength. "My real legacy isn't in the buildings that bear my name or the numbers in a bank account." He pointed toward the entrance, his hand steady. "It is standing right over there." Every head in the room turned. Damien walked off the stage, leaving the chaos behind him. The crowd of socialites and billionaires parted for him as if he were royalty, their faces a mixture of shock and dawning respect. He walked directly to Amelia and Leo. He knelt down in front of his son, ignoring the $1,000 suit and the pristine floor. He wrapped his arms around them both, pulling them into a fierce, protective embrace. The flashing cameras captured the moment, the disgraced heiress in handcuffs and the redeemed tycoon finding salvation in the arms of the humble family he had almost never known. The photograph that graced the front page of every newspaper the next morning needed no caption. It was the story of a fallen dynasty and the birth of a new, authentic one, built not on wealth but on truth. 9 months later, the autumn sun cast long shadows across a sprawling public park. The air was crisp, filled with the scent of fallen leaves and the sound of children's laughter. Damien Sterling was not in a boardroom. He was not wearing a suit. Dressed in comfortable jeans and a simple gray sweater, he was pushing a swing, his face alight with a joy so pure it seemed to radiate from him. "Higher, Dad!" Leo yelled, his small legs kicking with delight as the swing soared toward the sky. The word "Dad" still sent a jolt of pure, unadulterated happiness through Damien every time he heard it. It was a title he had never thought he would hold, and it meant more to him than chairman or CEO ever had. He laughed, a deep, easy sound that was once so foreign to him, and gave the swing another powerful push. Watching them from a nearby bench, Amelia Vance Sterling felt a profound sense of peace settle over her. The past year had been a whirlwind of court dates, public scrutiny, and immense change. But through it all, Damien had been her rock. He had been Leo's rock. The cold, detached tycoon she had first met was gone, replaced by this warm, present, and devoted man who found more fulfillment in a trip to the park than in closing a $10 billion deal. He was a changed man, the harsh lines of stress around his eyes softened by laughter and sleep-filled nights. After Evelyn's conviction, Damien had done something that shocked the financial world. He had systematically dismantled his own empire. He sold his majority stake in Sterling Industries, severing the final tie to his family's toxic legacy. With the billions he received, he did not buy another company or a private island. He created a new legacy. The Clara and Leo Vance Sterling Foundation was now one of the country's leading nonprofits, dedicated to providing free legal and financial support to victims of medical fraud and funding educational programs for underprivileged children. He was not a distant benefactor, he was its hands-on chairman, working tirelessly to right the kinds of wrongs that had defined his own past. It was his final, most meaningful act of redemption. He slowed the swing to a stop and walked over to the bench, sitting down beside Amelia. He didn't reach for her with the hesitation he once had. He took her hand, their fingers lacing together in a familiar, comfortable gesture. The opulent hotel suite was a distant memory. They now lived in a beautiful but modest house in a quiet, tree-lined suburb, a home filled with warmth and Leo's drawings taped to the refrigerator. "We started this in the most broken way possible," he said softly, his sapphire eyes, so like his son's, full of love and a lingering trace of awe at how far they had come. "Can we start again, the right way?" He didn't present a flashy diamond. Instead, he simply squeezed her hand, his proposal a quiet promise, not a grand gesture. Amelia's eyes shone with tears, but this time they were tears of pure joy. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, Damien." Just then, Leo came running over, his face flushed with happiness from the swings. He launched himself at them, hugging both their legs in a clumsy, enthusiastic embrace that smelled of grass and autumn air. "Are we going home now?" the boy asked, looking up at them, his gaze shifting between the two most important people in his world. Damien looked from his son's bright, innocent face to the loving eyes of the woman who had saved them both. His heart was so full he felt it might burst. The gaping hole that had defined his existence for so long was gone, filled with a love more valuable than any fortune. He smiled, a genuine, peaceful smile that reached his eyes and transformed his entire face. Yes, he said, his voice steady and sure, a final promise to his son and to himself. We are finally home.